What do you do when the world you mastered begins to change? When the rules that once rewarded you start to soften? When the structures that felt stable begin to shift? When the old signals of success no longer carry the same weight? Some resist. They double down on what used to work. Some charge forward, loudly and quickly, hoping speed alone will secure advantage. Others wait, watching, hesitating, wondering if the ground will settle. Moments like this are not new. We may feel them now, with artificial intelligence shaping industries, redefining labor, compressing time. But history has always moved in waves. And in the early 20th century, Europe stood on the edge of one. By the 1910s, Coco Chanel had built stability. Her boutique was operating. Her clientele was growing. Her position in Parisian society was strengthening. She had learned the rules, and then the rules changed. War fractured Europe. Resources tightened. Social roles shifted. The definition of elegance began to feel misaligned with daily life. This chapter is not about ambition. It's about interpretation. When stability gives way to shock, do you defend what you've built? Or do you reimagine it? Chanel did not announce a revolution. She responded to one. Welcome back to The Strategic Thinker, or TST for short. If you're a regular listener, thank you. Your presence and curiosity continue to shape this community. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found us. TST is a sanctuary for your mind, a calm space away from the noise, where you can slow down, think deeply, and reset your direction. Every conversation here is designed to help you approach life, work, and decisions with more intention and clarity. I'm Alan, your host. This is the Path to Greatness series, a deeper exploration into the lives of iconic people and brands to gain a deeper understanding of the thinking, the struggles, and the decisions that shaped who they became. In Chapter 1, we examine Coco Chanel's early years, a childhood shaped by loss, constraint, and uncertainty. From those beginnings, she began the long process of defining her own identity and stepping into worlds that once felt distant. Let's dive in. By 1910, Paris was still living in the glow of Belle Epoque. Cafes were full, theaters were vibrant, fashion houses competed in ornaments and extravagance. Elegance was layered, structured, and deliberate. Women's dresses were defined by corsets. Waists were tightened. Posture was engineered. Movement was secondary to appearance. Clothing signaled class as much as taste. Fabric was abundant. Decoration was admired. Complexity was a form of status. The house of worth still influenced fashion at that time. While the designs have loosened slightly, excess and theatricality remained dominant. Fashion at the time was not about comfort, it was about display. Chanel in these years was still emerging. Her hat boutique at 21 Rue Cambon had found traction. Her clientele included actresses and women from influential social circles. She had established credibility. But she was still operating inside a system shaped by tradition. Then came 1914. World War I did not begin as a fashion event. It began as a geopolitical fracture. Ferdinand was assassinated in June 1914. Within weeks, alliances activated. Europe mobilized. France entered war. Men were drafted. Factories converted to wartime production. Textile supply chains were disrupted. Paris did not stop functioning, but it changed. Luxury felt distant from daily reality. Fabric became scarce. Women stepped into roles previously occupied by men. They worked in factories. They drove ambulances. They moved more. And movement changes clothing. The corset began to feel less practical. Heavy ornament felt less relevant. Function gained importance. The cultural atmosphere shifted from display to resilience. It was not immediate, it was not uniform, but it was certainly noticeable. This was the environment Chanel stepped into during the war years. She did not create that disruption, she entered it. But what she chose to do next would align her with a generation that was already changing. When France entered World War I in August 1914, the transformation was immediate and visible. Hundreds and thousands of men were mobilized within weeks. By the end of the war, nearly 8 million French soldiers would have served. Over 1 million would not return. Paris did not collapse, but it thinned. Uniforms became a common sight. Rail stations were crowded with departures. Cafes remained open, yet conversations carried a different tone. Industry shifted towards wartime production. Textiles were redirected toward military needs. Wool and other materials became less accessible for civilian fashion. Fabric was no longer aesthetic. It became a strategic resource, and daily life adjusted. Women stepped into roles that had previously been closed to them. They worked in factories producing munitions. They drove trams. They managed businesses. They navigated cities more independently. This was not a social revolution in ideology. This was practical necessity. Clothing designed for display in salons and social gatherings began to feel misaligned for the rhythm of working life. Corsets restricted breathing and movement. Layered skirts hindered mobility. Elaborate tailoring required time, fabric, and access. While war did not immediately dismantle fashion tradition, it strained it. And the strain reveals weaknesses. The question emerging quietly during those years went from what is beautiful to what works. In Deauville, in the northern coast of France, Chanel had opened a boutique in 1913, just before the war began. Deauville was a resort town, frequented by wealthy Parisians and European elites. When the war broke out, it did not empty entirely. Some families relocated temporarily. Some continued to gather there, seeking distance from Paris and proximity to the sea. It was here, in this space between leisure and uncertainty, that Chanel began experimenting with something different. Not rebellion, reduction. Not ornament, simplicity. And what began as practical adaptation would soon become aesthetic influence. When Chanel opened her boutique in Deauville in 1913, she was not yet attempting to redefine fashion. She was responding to the place. Deauville was not Paris, it was coastal, area, less ceremonial. Women there needed clothing suitable for seaside walks, informal gatherings, travel, and sport. The mood was lighter than the rigid salons of the capital. At first, her designs were practical adaptations, simple blouses, relaxed skirts, garments that allowed movement rather than constraint. Then war accelerated the need for practicality. As textiles were redirected towards military use, certain luxurious fabrics became harder to obtain or less appropriate to display. Chanel turned toward a material not typically associated with high fashion. Jersey. At the time, jersey was primarily used for men's undergarments and athletic wear. It was soft, flexible, unpretentious. It was also affordable and available. Using jersey for women's outerwear was not an act of theatrical rebellion. It was simply pragmatic. But pragmatism in the right environment can become revolutionary. Chanel began designing garments with fewer structural constraints. Waists loosened, corsets disappeared from underneath certain designs, lines became clean, decoration was reduced, the body was allowed to move. In 1915, she expanded to Biarritz, another coastal resort, this time closer to the Spanish border. Biarritz had attracted international clientele, including Spanish aristocracy. There, her business grew significantly. As her garments loosened, something else changed. Around 1917, during the later years of the war, Chanel cut cut her hair short. The precise origin of the decision is debated. One account suggests she singed her hair while leaning over a candle and chose to cut it. Whether accidental or deliberate, what followed was visible. She kept it short. At the time, long hair was still the prevailing norm for women, especially in formal society. Hair was pinned, styled, and structured. Length carried its own symbolism of being a female and tradition. Short hair was practical though. It required less maintenance, it suited movement, it aligned with the rhythm of working life. Chanel did not announce it as a statement, she simply appeared in public that way. Clients noticed, actresses noticed. Women in her circle certainly noticed. Like her clothing, the gesture was understated, but it reinforced the same language. Remove excess, reduce constraint, retain elegance. By the early 1920s, shorter hairstyles would become widely associated with the modern woman. The bob would define the flapper image. Chanel had already been there. She was not inventing liberation. She was living in accordance with the aesthetic she was building. These designs did not shout for attention. They did not compete in ornament with the houses that still favored embellishment. They felt modern. And modernity during war had a different meaning. Women were commuting, working, walking more, navigating cities. Clothing that had once symbolized leisure began to feel impractical. Chanel's designs fit the tempo of daily life. The post-war years did not return to the Belle Epoque. Europe had changed psychologically. Loss, mobility, and exposure to new roles had altered perspectives. The rigid hierarchies of pre-war life felt less absolute. In the early 1920s, Chanel refined her aesthetic further. Shorter hemlines, muted palettes, black as elegance rather than mourning. She introduced the little black dress in 1926, described by American Vogue as a kind of uniform for women of taste. Simplicity had become status. And then in 1921, she moved beyond clothing. Working with perfumer Ernest Borg, she launched a fragrance. Not a floral named after a flower, not a romantic metaphor. A number. Simply a number. Chanel number 5. Its composition was abstract, layered, modern. The bottle was minimalist. Geometric? Restrained. It did not resemble the ornate perfume bottle of the era. It felt aligned with her clothing. Structured, restrained, invisible presence. By the mid-1920s, the House of Chanel employed thousands of workers. Her boutiques expanded. Her aesthetic shaped an era increasingly associated with liberation, movement, and understated confidence. She had an influence on cultural change, and she had designed accordingly. By the late 1920s, she was no longer emergent. She was dominant. Her name had become shorthand for modern elegance. Her aesthetic had shaped the design of a generation. Her perfume traveled across borders. Her ateliers employed thousands. Paris in the late 1920s pulsed with energy. The war was behind them. The last generation filled cafes. Jazz drifted through salons. Cinema was rising. Fortune were being made on both sides of the Atlantic. It felt like acceleration. Industry expanded. Markets climbed. Confidence compounded. Modernity no longer felt fragile. It felt inevitable. For Chanel, the alignment between her vision and the spirit of the age seemed complete. She had read the shift. She had designed for it. She had benefited from it. And when momentum sustains long enough, it can begin to feel permanent. Success, especially cultural success, carries a subtle intoxication. Not necessarily arrogance, but reinforcement. Orders increase, visibility grows, influence expands. The environment affirms you. Yet, as we know, looking into the past, History rarely moves in straight lines. In October 1929, financial markets in the United States collapsed. The shockwave did not stop at Wall Street. Global trade slowed, wealth contracted, confidence evaporated. The Great Depression would reshape economies, industries, and social structures across Europe. Luxury was not immune. However, the Great Depression did not erase Chanel overnight. Her brand was too established, her name too embedded in culture. But the atmosphere shifted, orders slowed, clients hesitated, wealth that once flowed easily began to tighten. The world that had celebrated ease and modern leisure turned more cautious. Confidence, once expansive, became guarded. Luxury did not disappear in times of contraction, it transforms. The question from any creator in that moment is simple and difficult at the same time. Do you double down on what made you successful? Or do you adjust before decline forces your hand? Chanel had built her entire empire by reading change before others did. Now she faced a different kind of reading. The mood of prosperity had carried her forward. The mood of uncertainty required something else. Restraint, judgment, positioning. Because when external conditions shift, strength alone is not enough. Relevance must be re-earned. The illusion of being unstoppable fades quietly. What remains is adaptability. And that's where the next chapter begins. Before we move into what this chapter might mean for us, I want to pause here. We've just walked through a decade and a half that reshaped not only fashion but culture, from seaside practicality to wartime adaptation, from subtle simplification to global dominance, from expansion to the first signs of contraction. You may have noticed certain patterns. You may have felt tension at different moments. You may have seen something entirely different from what I saw. This is part of the intention, because history, when told carefully, is not a script to follow. It's a landscape to observe. Coco Chanel did not operate in isolation. She operated inside forces much larger than herself: war, industrial shifts, psychological change across Europe, economic expansion, sudden contraction. At different moments, those forces either resisted her or amplified her. The question that quietly runs beneath this chapter is not simply how she moved forward, it's how she positioned herself within change, where she adapted, where she anticipated, where she leveraged. And perhaps most interestingly, where momentum may have started to feel self-sustaining. Before I share the patterns that stand out to me, I would encourage you to reflect for a moment. What felt decisive in the story? What felt inevitable? What felt similar to your world? Because in many ways, we are living through our own version of structural change. And the way we read our environment today may well determine how the next chapter of our own lives unfolds. Now, here are a few insights that resonate most strongly with me. 1. Constraints can become your advantage. When fabric was scarce, Coco did not wait for ideal materials. She used what was available. Jersey was not glamorous, it was practical. But practicality in that moment was exactly what the world needed. Constraints did not shrink her options. Constraints ended up clarifying her way forward. In our own lives, we often wait for better conditions, more capital, more certainty, more validation. Yet sometimes that limitation is the catalyst. It forces focus, it forces originality, it forces us to move. 2. The right moment magnifies the ready. Chanel did not become capable in 1920. She had been building skill, taste, and confidence for years before that. What changed was the environment. War reshaped roles, society redefined mobility, modernity accelerated. When that shift came, she was ready. Timing does not create capability. It reveals and amplifies it. That's why preparation matters long before opportunity appears. When change accelerates, those who have quietly built depth are the ones whose impact multiplies. 3. There are moments when you must move before you can fully explain why. Chanel did not run surveys before simplifying her designs. She did not wait for consensus before cutting her hair. She sensed alignment. That inner signal is difficult to articulate. It's not impulse, it's not recklessness. It's accumulated judgment, the kind that develops only through experience. There will be moments in our lives when something feels right before we can justify it. Not because it's guaranteed to succeed, but because it aligns with who we are becoming and where the world seems to be heading. Strategy is a muscle. It strengthens when we act, observe, and adjust. It weakens when we remain spectators. Bold movement, grounded in experience, is often what separates those who participate in change from those who watch it unfold. As we wrap up this incredible second chapter, the following is something I've been pondering. Strategy strengthens through action. Is there a shift unfolding around you right now that you can feel even if you cannot fully explain it yet? Every era brings opportunity. Some eras bring moral complexity. The next chapter of Chanel's life unfolds in rising uncertainty. When the world fractures, positioning becomes more than strategic. It becomes personal, and the cost of decisions begins to extend beyond business. If you prefer to revisit ideas in writing, The Compass is the published companion to each episode, a concise reference you can return to. You'll find it at maisontst.com. As always, thank you for spending this time with me. You hold the power to shape your destiny. Strategic thinking is your compass. We will build an amazing future, one thoughtful decision at a time. Until next time, keep getting better every day.